WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It's going to be a cold week in Minnesota. I hope this guy has his long johns packed. I have mine filled to the brim, but I think it'll be warm where we're broadcasting from. We'll be on Radio Row out at the Mall of America all next week. It is my 25th Super Bowl broadcasting live from Radio Row. My first Super Bowl broadcasting was actually in Minnesota. I called in the Kenny Albert Show back in 1992 when the Washington Redskins and Ernest Biner were taking on the helmetless Thurman Thomas and the Minnesota Vikings. By the way, if it means anything, Luke, all these years later, I guess it's been 26 years later, right? Because that was in 1992 since Super Bowl. That Super Bowl, John Stedman got me tickets. I sat on the 50-yard line right in front of the press box. Steve Sable was over my left shoulder. I sat next to the great Nat Moore, wide receiver of the Miami Dolphins. In my same row was Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, famous Minnesota producers. Evander Holyfield was in my section, and a certain orange man that would later go on to be the President of the United States was actually sitting in my section. It was 3 wives ago and about 4 bankruptcies ago, but he did sit in my section the last time in Minnesota. You know, this time I really was, and nothing against Schwartz or the Eagles or Torrey Smith or any of that. The better story for me and you and the fun would have been had the Minnesota Vikings been hosting the game and playing in it. For that, I probably will be eternally sad. Even if my boy Schwartz gets himself a green Super Bowl ring, I thought the whole deliciousness of the Vikings playing at home, it kind of bums me out a little bit, Luke.
Yeah, I totally see that, and part of me feels that way too. I mean, it just would have been interesting to see what it would have been like. I think, because we always talk about how the Super Bowl many times has that corporate feel. Not every time, because I think how many Ravens fans made the trip down to New Orleans 5 years ago. So there are some fan bases who do that. But it would have been interesting to see what a home Super Bowl atmosphere really sounds like. We've all talked about it. I mean, few years back, it was the Cowboys, and wondering about that, and they clearly didn't come close to getting it done the year it was down in Jerry's World, and this was a thing that, especially when Stephon Diggs catches the ball and runs to the end zone. I mean, you heard what that stadium sounded like. I mean, some of those videos went viral as far as the in-stadium just roar that you heard, and it would have been so enticing. I mean, especially talking about a team that. A Vikings team that hasn't been to the Super Bowl in a really long time, has never won it. That would have been so fascinating. Would have been so intriguing. I mean, there's so many football fans, even just fans or people who have opportunities to go to a Super Bowl who might not be rooting for one team or the other. Everyone roots against New England in that scenario. So,
well, if you're American, it's the one time you root against red, white, and blue, I think.
So, it's definitely disappointing from that standpoint, and they look like a team that had a really good chance to be able to do that. I mean, you thought that defense was going to travel much better than it did on Sunday. So I'm with you on that. There's definitely, it's not something I was losing sleep over the possibility, but it definitely would have been intriguing to see what the overall jazz in that city would have been. Even with it being cold in the middle of winter in Minneapolis, I mean, you and I have the unique opportunity to be in a Super Bowl city that week, and most of the time it doesn't really come to life big time until about Wednesday or Thursday. But there would have been such a buzz there all week. It would have just been, I would assume, just a nonstop party.
Beginning like now.
What do you even compare it to? I mean, it wouldn't have been tailgating and all that because it's bitterly cold, but it would have been like a college town all week, I would assume. So it's disappointing from that standpoint, no doubt. Maybe we'll see a home Super Bowl at some point for one of these teams, but man, couldn't have gotten a whole lot closer than what Minnesota was able to do. And after that opening drive, things were looking really good for them, but it was all downhill after that.
For the Minnesota side of this, and I guess the story will be, what if Bridgewater, what if Bradford, what if, and more than that with Case Keenum now, is that they now enter the market once again, sort of kind of without a quarterback, right? I mean, they're in no better shape than anybody else who doesn't have a quarterback, even though they came, I don't want to say a heartbeat, because they got their ass kicked on Sunday up in Philadelphia. That defense got pushed around in a way that I don't think any of us expected. Certainly, it'll be a long off season for them, whether you hook a field goal the wrong way like they did a couple of years ago, or whether you get beat 38-7, you go back to the drawing board and say that defense is good enough, some of the skill position are good enough. But we're going to look at Case Keenum and say, can you win a Super Bowl with him? And they're going to have to ask a $20 million question out in Minnesota about that and about all the other moving parts of their quarterback situation. They came from very, very close to having this incredible thing happen and being able to play at home for a Super Bowl to being sort of running adrift a little bit into the offseason and not knowing what direction to head, because I don't think that people are going to be lining up to give Case Keenum a lot of money. I mean, Kirk Cousins might be their quarterback by April, right?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, let's give Case Keenum a lot of credit. He had a heck of a year. He had a 98 passer rating, 22 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. But you're talking about 1 year. Are you that big of a believer that? And I know a lot of people were speculating before the game. I saw some of the talking heads on the pregame shows. I forget who it was. I don't know if it was Schefter or Ian Rappaport. They were talking about the possibility of Case Keenum getting the franchise tag, which that even for 1 year, that's a steep investment. I think it's very clear they're going to move on from Sam Bradford. I mean, as well as Sam Bradford played at times for them, you can't count on him to stay healthy. And with Teddy Bridgewater, there's certainly not enough confidence to just hand the job back to him, or by any stretch of the imagination. So what do you do there? I mean, Case Keenum, if he wins on Sunday, you're probably glad to at least give him the franchise tag, and if he at least gets you to a Super Bowl. But this is that that territory that teams hate to be in. I mean, you like it because it's a capable quarterback. It's someone that has proven you can win at least some games with, but is he truly a guy that you can trust that you're going to have to pay a lot of money to? He's not going to get $125 million or anything crazy like that, but I'm sure there's going to be some team out there. If it's not Minnesota, there's going to be some team willing to pay him some real serious money to be a quarterback. And what do you do? I mean, because of the reasons you laid out, you do have a really good defense. You do have 2 really good wide receivers. You have a good tight end. You have a running game that much improved from where it's been the last couple years. It's tough. I mean, it's easy to just say, well, okay, well, you want to do better than that. Well, it's not always easy doing that. And if you do that, and okay, you can go out there and try to sign Kirk Cousins, but what are you going to have to sacrifice in the process as far as other pieces? So that's going to be one of the more interesting calls of this offseason, when you have a guy who had a terrific season, was garnering, not that anyone considered him the favorite to be the MVP by any stretch, but was garnering at least some consideration at various points over the second half of the season, the way he played. But can you really trust it after 1 year? Are you really a believer that Case Keenum can take you to the promised land? And as much as I don't blame him for what happened on Sunday, certainly didn't play well. Philadelphia gave him absolute fits, and if you're the Vikings, you check all the other boxes pretty much. But are you really trusting Case Keenum enough or you're going to invest real money in him, and then you have to start making some other sacrifices here and there with your roster, as we see any team that has a franchise quarterback has to do.
Luke Jones joining us here. He is Baltimore. Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. We will be broadcasting live from the Mall of America in Minnesota next week. There will be no Vikings, but there will be plenty of Eagles there, and the gangrene all bringing the cheesesteaks and the tasty cakes and the soft pretzels out to Philadelphia out to Minnesota to freeze next week. And on the other side of this, we wind up getting a Philadelphia's team and a franchise and a city that's going to be all lubed up and all gassed up, and wondering whether Nick Foles is a guy who can win a Super Bowl. And I think it's going to be a very, very hard sell against Tom Brady. I think Vegas is going to have a hard time with that. I think the line opened at 5.5 5.5 and immediately moved to like 6.5 and then went back down to 6. But I expect the thing to look like a touchdown 2 weeks from now by the time we get there and the money starts rolling in, because I don't think there's a whole lot of smart money on the Eagles in this game, honestly.
I mean, we've said it, and I even said this to you last week. I mean, yes, was there some scenario I could envision where Jacksonville would beat Tom Brady? Sure, because I did like that defense, and they kind of proved their worth at least through the first 3 quarters, at least through the first half of what they were capable of doing. But you can't bet against Brady and Belichick. I mean, you just can't until the next great dynasty, if there ever is one, until that comes around and knocks them off their throne. How can you bet against them? I mean, and I'll say this. I mean, I'm going to be intrigued to see what Jim Schwartz can dial up against that Brady offense.
By the way, you mentioned the tree of Belichick earlier today. Jimmy Schwartz is the tree of Belichick. Belichick gave him his first job. Belichick hired him, put him in Berea for $10,000 a year, running around picking up rookies at the airport back in 1992 and 93 and 94. So the Belichick side of that is here's Schwartz trying to beat his mentor to get a ring too. It's everywhere, man.
Oh, it really is. And, I mean, Jim Schwartz, what a good story there. Clearly went into Detroit after, the Lions had been winless in the Matt Millen era.
Dude, he went to hell and back. He took a job in Buffalo.
Right. I mean, I was just going to say, I mean, he kind of, sort of got the Lions back on track, but then it got derailed again. And, he certainly faced some criticism, and some of that criticism completely legitimate and fair. I don't think it's any secret. Certainly, personality-wise, rubbed some people the wrong way when he was there. I famously think of him and Jim Harbaugh with the handshake coming off the field and some things like that. But
that went on 2 weeks ago with Sean Payton, right?
Oh, yeah, no.
I'm
not putting too much into that. My overall point is, though, he went into a really tough situation and came up short. And, what was with Buffalo for a year, then wasn't coaching in the NFL for a year. And then turns up in Philadelphia a year ago and has done a heck of a job with that defense.
That didn't feel like a winnable situation when he took that job. The Buffalo thing, I think he did. They had a good defense there, and Marone and all that stuff. And you talk about Marone was on the other side. I mean, talk about resident geniuses. Marone has sort of moved into that realm lately, getting Jacksonville to where they were. Yeah. But Schwartz was rumored to the Giants job 3 weeks ago, and it went away. And I know on a personal level, his family lives in Nashville. He moved his family back to Nashville. That Titans job popping open would have been a dream job for him. I don't think he got a sniff. And, obviously they went with Vrabel, another Belichick guy. But, Schwartz isn't going to get a job here, even if he wins a Super Bowl. So if you're not going to get a job, you're going to come back to Philadelphia next year, you might as well do it with a ring, right?
Yeah, why not? I mean, I saw 1 or 2 reports talking about Schwartz still being a possibility maybe in Arizona over the weekend, but it doesn't sound like that's necessarily, he's the favorite by any stretch of the imagination. So, yeah, I mean, it's looking like there's a good chance he's gonna wind up being back in Philadelphia, and he's done a heck of a job. Now, the one thing I'll say as far as him coming into that situation, anyone who paid attention to the Eagles, even with the disappointment with Chip Kelly and how that thing started fast and then really fizzled out, you knew they had a good front. I mean, that defensive line with Fletcher Cox being the anchor, you knew they had a good front, and they've only added to that since then with guys like Jernigan, Chris Long. I mean, guys that are not even starters for them that come in and are big parts of that rotation. So he had that to work with. Keep in mind, they lost their starting middle linebacker this year. They had some injuries. I mean, Darby had the injury early on, was able to get back on the field, but that's a deep defense, and that's a really productive defense. And as much as everyone was gaga over Carson Wentz, and understandably so, the way he played and the way they got off to such a terrific start, that defense was doing damage, and that was the one thing that you pointed to. If any Eagles fans, if they were trying to have any hope whatsoever when Wentz went down, it was that defense. So give Jim Schwartz a ton of credit. Like I said, he's a lot to work with there, but he's made it work. You got to have that all moving in symphony. You got to rotate those guys in effectively, and he's been able to do that. So he's certainly rebuilt his coaching reputation from a standpoint of next couple years. You would think he's going to have a chance to be a head coach again, and you hope he takes some of the lessons from his first time around with Detroit and learns from that and is better the second time around. I mean, it's so funny because we're seeing this with guys like Pat Shurmur, who was in Cleveland, and some of these guys, they get their first opportunity. You get one of 32 jobs. There's only 5 or 6 that open up most years in any given year. And let's face it, some of those situations, you walk in, you're dead man walking from day one. Whether it's you don't have a good front office, there's just not nearly enough talent there, whatever the case. So a lot of times when these guys become head coaches for the first time, they fail, and you just automatically assume, well, no one wants that guy. Why would we want that guy? He lost where he was before. So, you have some. You got to wear that for a little while, and you rebuild your reputation. You go somewhere as a coordinator or as an assistant, and you just coach your ass off. And Jim Schwartz has been able to do that the last couple of years for the Eagles, and you hope with him being a Baltimore guy, rooting for him, that you hope he gets an opportunity somewhere else at some point here in the not too distant future. But certainly has done a really good job with that Eagles defense. And hey, he no one's going to be expecting him to do it, but hey, he's got that opportunity to knock off Tom Brady, and you do that, guarantee you he's going to be a head coach here in a very short period of time after that, if they're able to do what many people are going to view as maybe not the impossible, but the very, very unlikely to accomplish.
Luke, I'm releasing Purple Rain 2 daily, a chapter a day. It's been 5 years, and it's really weird, man, like that the 5 years has come and gone so quickly, right? Like, I look at these pictures of Joe Flacco and I see where, a Nick Foles is going to be that guy this week that's going to go in, and they say you can't do it, and, you're never good enough, and you were the backup, and you were, all of that stuff that goes into this and all the journey, like the strangeness of Torrey Smith being involved in this on the same day when I released Chapter 11, which was all about his brother passing in the New England game at that period of time. And we go back to the Jacoby Jones catch 2 weeks ago, and we go back to 24 hours apart, the championship games, where we won that game on Saturday 5 years ago. See all the pictures of, Harbaugh raising Joe Flacco's arm and all of our crazies that were up there. And all this stuff pops up on your timeline now, right, on Facebook, and say, 5 years ago today, you were in New Orleans or whatever. I guess time does pass on all of this, but it's going to be fun to watch these Eagles fans have a little bit of fun because it's been a long time for them. I think it sucks that we're going out to Minnesota and the Vikings won't be a part of it, but I think this is a tasty little Super Bowl in a lot of ways, and I think even for Doug Peterson, we talk about all these coaches moving to that next level of resident genius. He hasn't been talked about much, and coming from that reed tree and coming back to Philadelphia through a tree that he came from, and something that Laurie was very comfortable with in the ownership side of saying, yeah, Chip Reed, you did okay, but everybody in the building hates you. You've got to go. And he paid Chip Reed a lot of money to leave, right? So this is a huge victory, I think, for the Eagles organization that has tried to climb that mountain so many times, and they've come close, but they haven't been able to pull it off but for one time with Donovan McNabb 12 years ago, 13 years ago.
Yeah, and they're facing Tom Brady and Bill Belichick and the Patriots again. I mean, go figure. But, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because, we were just talking about Jim Schwartz. We've talked about some of the former Ravens. But think about when Doug Peterson was hired 2 years ago. I mean, that was considered such a blah hire. We always talk about the big names, the hotshot up and coming coordinator, whoever it might be, and there's always those guys that have a lot of sizzle, and ultimately time proves whether the stake is there or not. And a lot of times it's not there, but this was a case where Doug Peterson was not an exciting hire whatsoever. I mean, no one was. I'm not sure anyone in Philadelphia was really all that jazzed up about that, especially on the heels of Chip Kelly. And
well, they wanted John Gruden, right? I mean, that's what people. That's the mess that that the media has created, right?
But it's such a great lesson. And look, I don't know how the rest of Doug Peterson. This might be the pinnacle, and he might get to a Super Bowl, and they might lose in 2 weeks, and then they never sniff another Super Bowl, and maybe he's out of there in 3 years. I mean, I don't know, but what he's done to this point, and certainly it helps when you have a franchise quarterback come in, but keep in mind, they lost their franchise quarterback, and he's currently been coaching up a good backup quarterback in Nick Foles.
And by the way, there was nothing more controversial than them playing hot potato with that quarterback position and trading up to get a kid from North Dakota. Sure. I mean, that's where we were a year and a half ago. They were drafting a kid from North Dakota and giving away a draft for him. So the rewards are legitimate here. I mean, they've earned this one.
They have. But I think Doug Peterson. It's a great reminder in the same way that John Harbaugh a decade ago. No one was excited about hiring John Harbaugh. I mean,
a special teams coach,
right? I mean but it very much shows that it doesn't always have to be the 1A guy from a stigma standpoint, from a perception standpoint. Just hire the right guy, and sometimes there can be more than one right guy. But just make sure you hire a guy who's right for the job, and you have to give Doug Peterson a heck of a lot of credit. He walked into a scenario in the aftermath of Chip Kelly, who was the opposite of Doug Peterson in terms of perception. I mean, Chip Kelly was the hot shot coach coming from college, innovative, the sports science stuff, all the RPOs, all that stuff, all the innovations, and some of those innovations were good, by the way. Let's not completely trash Chip Kelly, even though he wasn't successful ultimately. But Doug Peterson, the exact opposite. Just meh kind of hire from a perception standpoint. He's done a heck of a job with that group. I mean, everyone assumed that Carson Wentz goes down, that their season was over. And anyone who watched the Eagles the last couple weeks of the regular season, I mean, boy, we thought we saw bad offense with the Ravens here over the course of the season. Philadelphia, the last week or two of the regular season, was every bit as bad as the Ravens looked at their worst offensively this year. And they figured it out. And you got to give Peterson a lot of credit in that regard. Again, Nick Foles, better backup quarterback than most in the league. Certainly you can do a lot worse than him, but from the second half of the Atlanta game on, he's played some really, really impressive football. And whether he carries that on against New England or not, who knows, but Peterson deserves a heck of a lot of credit. And again, a great example of, you can kind of win the in the court of public opinion by hiring a John Gruden or Chip Kelly or whatever hotshot name you want to talk about in any given year, but ultimately it comes down to the results on the field, and got to be really impressed with what Doug Peterson's been able to do with this team, especially after Carson Wentz went down.
Did I call Chip Kelly Chip something else? I think I did.
You called him Chip Reed.
Chip Reed. Did I call him Andy Reid?
You just meshed together the end of the Andy Reid era with Chip Kelly.
Chip Kelly never won anything. That's why I don't know his last name.
No, that's fine, yeah.
Where's he now?
Anyway.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. What college is he coaching? With Broken Pelvis State now or whatever? Some team not called Alabama, where they're the only ones that win anyway. He is Luke Jones. He is Luke at WNST.net. Baltimore Luke. Oh, I'm just getting warmed up. Wait till I get out to Minnesota. Wait till I start to freeze to death. It'll all be interesting next week. Purple Rain 2 is coming out every day this week at WNST.net. I'm getting lots of compliments on it. If you didn't read it, you can go read it now because the Ravens are giving you nothing to read or, Bishotti press conferences. We're waiting on all that. We do have a defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale. That's up in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault as well. All right, we're buckling up our chin straps here for all things Philadelphia Eagles next week and trying to beat the New England Patriots. I will be calling the Philadelphia Eagles the Ravens of the North just for the next 13 days, and only because they're playing the Patriots. I'd do the same thing if it was the Steelers. If the Jaguars won, I'd let you guys go root for the Jaguars. I'd probably be rooting for the Jaguars too. Not really because of Schwartz and Torrey and these other guys, but there was a lot of Ravens blood in that Philadelphia team. They are going to beat or try to beat the New England Patriots, so they're going to get my love and support here. That's all I'm going to say. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Baltimore Luke and Luke at WNST.net finds him. We're out on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live right here on our Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Any breaking news will happen first out on the WNST Tech Service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis is here on Thursday from 3 until 5, getting you ready for the Pro Bowl this weekend. The always exciting Pro Bowl in Orlando. If there's any breaking news on Machado, you'll get that first on the WNST Tech Service as well. Morning newspaper ships with the aforementioned Purple Rain 2. in your morning newspaper at 7 a.m. We deliver that digitally. We save a tree. 7 a.m. it comes to you. It's all courtesy of Planet Fitness and planetfitness.com. Last but never least, any radio you miss, you find in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. You can listen live by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Big week here. Big getaway next week. We'll be getting some Terps in here, some Orioles talk, some Ravens offseason news, but lots of Super Bowl 52 as we gas up the bus for the Ray Lewis induction in August. That is on sale under our Road Trips tab at WNST.net if you want to join us. Baseball, football, Pirates game, Indians game, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We're doing it all out in Cleveland in August, and the price is right as well, as it always is in our WNST road trips. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.